Perfect. Sorry for my picture of my kids in the back. That's just what ends up happening when you have kids. Do you guys see this? You see the screen? Okay. So, how to talk to your children or kids about mental health. As I said, my name is Orit, so I am a registered psychotherapist qualifying. Qualifying just means I'm working towards my hours to get my full qualification and being able to do my exam, um, which will hopefully be in a few months. I'm also a social service worker. I have my BA in sociology, and I have my registration with the Canadian Certification of Addiction Counselors as well. So before we even begin, I'm just going to go through a little bit of an agenda. Again, I know this looks like a lot, but it's all going to be in a PowerPoint and it will be available for anyone to be able to sort of go back and look through if needed. But in a few moments, we will be doing a mindfulness practice, because I love starting with a mindfulness practice. And I think sometimes just being able to ground a little bit is very much needed. And as parents, we don't always have the time to be able to do that. So if we can take that few moments, I would be very grateful. We're going to be looking at what is mental health, what is mental wellness, and the differences and similarities between the two. Because there is differences and similarities between the both. And a lot of the time they're very much enmeshed in it. Some warning signs to look out for, and then how to start talking to your kids about it, and the emotions piece of it, and knowing your role as a parent, but then also looking at the codependency piece within parenting and within the communication with our children. And then a little bit just about the mental health and substance use, and then just another brief overview about JACS. So again, I know this looks like a lot, but we'll groove on through. All right, so just for mindfulness practice, I'm just going to do a few-minute body scan if that's okay. So if you're able to, close your eyes if you'd like to. If not, that's okay, as long as you feel safe to do so. So let's begin by making yourself comfortable, whether you're sitting in a chair, laying in bed, or sitting down, or just standing up, whatever you're doing at this moment. Allow your back to be straight but not stiff, with your feet on the ground or in front of you. You could also do this, as I mentioned, standing, or if you can prefer to lie down and have your head supported. Your hands can be resting gently in your lap or at your side, and allow your eyes to close or to remain open with a soft gaze. Take several long, deep breaths, breathing in fully and exhaling slowly. Breathing in through your nose and out through your nose or your mouth. And feeling your stomach and your diaphragm expanding on inhale and relaxing as you let go and exhale. Beginning to let go of the noises around you and beginning to shift your attention from outside to inside yourself. If there are any sounds happening around you, simply notice them and bring your focus back to your breathing, if you can. Now, slowly bringing your attention down to your feet, you begin observing the sensations in your feet. You might want to wiggle your toes or feel your toes against your socks or your shoes. Just notice them. You might imagine sending your breath down to your feet, as if the breath is traveling through your nose to the lungs and through your abdomen all the way down to your feet and back up again through your nose and your lungs. Perhaps you don't feel anything at all, and that's fine. Just allow yourself to feel the sensation of not feeling anything. When you're ready, allow your feet to dissolve into your mind and move your attention to your ankle, your calves, your knees, and your thighs, and observing the sensations you may be experiencing throughout your legs, breathing in and breathing out through your legs. If your mind begins to wander during this exercise, gently notice it without any judgment and bring it back to noticing the sensation in your legs. If you notice any discomfort, pain, or stiffness, don't judge it, just simply notice it and accept it and welcome it in. Then, on the next breath out, we're going to allow our legs to dissolve in our mind and move the sensations to your lower back and your pelvis, softening and releasing as you breathe in and out, slowly moving your attention to your mid back as well as your upper back, becoming curious about the sensations here. You may become aware of sensations in the muscles, the temperature, or the points of contact with furniture or with your bed or wherever you are. With each breath out, you may let go of tensions you're carrying, and then very gently shift your focus to your stomach and all of your internal organs here. Perhaps you notice the feelings of your clothing or some digestion happening, or your belly rising or falling with each breath. If you notice opinions arising about these areas, gently let them go and return to noticing the sensation. As you continue to breathe, bring your awareness to your chest and your heart region, and just notice your heartbeat. Observe how the chest rises during the inhale and how the chest falls during the exhale, letting go of any judgments that may arise. On the next breath out, shift your focus to your hands and your fingertips. See if you can channel your breathing in and out of this area into breathing in and out of your hands. And then on the next breath out, we're going to shift our awareness into our arms and observing the sensation or lack of sensations that may be occurring here. You may notice some differences between your left arm and your right arm. No need to judge this, just accept it and welcome it in. As you exhale, you may experience the arms soften and release tension. Continue to breathe and shift focus to your neck, your shoulders, and your throat. This is an area where we often have tension. Be with the sensations here. It could be tightness, rigidity, or holding. You may notice the shoulders moving along with your breath. Let go of any thoughts or stories you're telling yourself about this area. As you breathe, you may feel tension rolling off of your shoulders. On the next breath out, shift your focus and direct your attention to your scalp, your head, and your face. Observe all the sensations occurring here. Notice the movement of the air as you breathe in or out of your nostrils or mouth. As you exhale, you might notice the softening of any tension you may be holding. And now, let your attention to expand out to include your entire body as a whole. Bring your awareness to the top of your head down to the bottom of your toes. Feel the gentle rhythm of your breath as it moves through your body. As we come to the end of the practice, we can take a full deep breath, taking in all of the energy of the practice and exhaling fully. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes and return your attention to the present moment. As you become fully alert and awake, consider setting the intention that this practice of building awareness will benefit anyone you may come in contact with. Welcome back. Hopefully that helped just sort of ground a little bit and bring us back into the present moment. I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm a mom of two younger children. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So they're both quite literally considered COVID babies as well. I gave birth to my first March 2020. So as the world sort of erupted into something. So all of this is something that I'm continuing to learn and continuing to put into motion, even from now, with my 3-year-old, to be able to hopefully gain that knowledge and have her gain that knowledge and experience as well. If there's any questions, please feel free to, whether I can't see in the chat box right now, but I could see if there's any hands up or anything happening. So I will gladly answer any questions if there anything comes up, or we can leave them to the end. So if we are looking at what is mental health? So again, it's very much a term that gets thrown out quite a bit. I think within social media or just even on TV and the radio, it's talked about quite a bit. But in basic, it's our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we may think, we feel, we act. It also helps to determine how we may or may not handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. As well, it also looks at how many factors contribute to mental health, including your biology, your life experiences, as well as the environment. And there's a lot more within this as well. But then if we look at what mental wellness is, according to the WHO, so the World Health Organization, mental wellness is a state of well-being where a person realizes their own abilities, can or cannot cope with normal stress in their life, and can work productively and can make a contribution to their community. So what are the similarities between the two? Obviously, right off the bat, they both include the word mental, right? And mental is the cognitive aspect of things. So both of these deal and work with the brain. They both play extremely important roles in an individual's life, as well as your mental health if your mental health and wellness is poor, chances are you're going to be unhappy or you're going to be going through quite the roller coaster of emotions and feelings. It's so important for you to prioritize your your mental wellness and your mental health. They very much work together and work hand in hand to be able to create a balanced and fulfilling life. Now, if we look at a little bit more of the differences, so mental wellness focuses on more of a holistic approach. And a holistic meaning less medical model, very much focusing more on the environment and looking within yourself. It is also referring to the overall quality of an individual's life. So through self-care and mindfulness, you can become mentally well and live a well-rounded life. And I very much want to put emphasis that mindfulness may not be for everybody. And I completely understand that. I'll be full disclosure, because I think it's important to be able to do that. I can't sit through a yoga class. That's not for me, right? Sitting through 45-minute meditations, that's not for me. Give me a musical theater album sitting in my car blasting, no problem. I will make that happen. Do you know what I mean? And that's where I think mindfulness is going to be different for everybody. And it's whatever opportunity you have to be able to even give yourself a few minutes, which I know as parents is really hard to do. But even if it's sitting in your car, going to pick up a few minutes early so you can blast that song or have a hot coffee or a hot tea or eat a sandwich fresh, take it and go. Do you know what I mean? A lot of the time there's often that guilt of being able to do it for yourself. And I'm bringing this up because I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but if we're going to talk to our kids about mental health and mental wellness, we got to do it for ourselves, right? A lot of the time, parents are very much role models for how their kids or children act, learn these behaviors to be able to portray them in themselves. So that's why I think it's extremely important for us to be able to do that as well. So if we're looking at mental health, it's more specific. It refers to the behaviors and the actions that are often caused by how mentally healthy you are or are not. Based on how good your mental health is, you could suffer from mental illnesses and disorders like anxiety, PTSD, and or depression. And again, full asterisk here as well with you can experience symptoms of a mental illness or a mental health concern and not necessarily have a full diagnosis, right? I very much, I speak about this later as well. I want to put the emphasis on the fact that self-diagnosis can be dangerous as well, and that it is important to connect with a mental health professional if anyone is experiencing any of these concerns. So just a little bit of statistics having to do with mental health in children or youth. And again, this is within Canada. I prefer to look within Canada. And sometimes these numbers can be scary. So take these with a grain of salt because these are ever changing all the time. Except for the top one, where 70% of mental health has an onset in childhood. A lot of the time, it's something that may trigger or may start in an individual's youth or upbringing or just within their childhood, a specific event that may have occurred. And it's events that the parent may or may not be aware of. So that's where having that open conversation with the kids and with your children is really, really important. An estimated 75, that's supposed to be percent, sorry, of children with mental health disorders do not access the services that are available to them. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, about the treatment options or the opportunities for the youth as well. So after accidents, suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 24. And I know that that's a scary thing to think about as well. And it's interesting because we're actually talking about this in my organization right now too. And it's important to be able to, and I can send resources for this as well, to identify where an individual is having the suicidal ideations and the thoughts versus the actions of suicide, and what to look out for when it comes to that as well, because there's very much a range to look for when it comes to that. So in 2016, suicide accounted for 19% of deaths among youth aged 10 to 14, and 29% for youth aged 15 to 19, and then 23% amongst youth adults aged 20 to 24. The 29% does not surprise me, because the 18 and 19-year-old aspect is when they're starting university and college. And a lot of the time, that's where, unfortunately, a lot of the attempts or tries or successes of suicide do end up happening. And that's something I know a lot of colleges and universities are taking very, very seriously right now, and are very much tackled that topic, and have introduced even more of the reading weeks that didn't happen in colleges but happened in universities, and just more options and accessibility for mental health concerns, because that was a big thing for them. So it's happening a lot more, and it's happening a lot more in high schools too, such as even JACS going in and talking about it. You know what I mean? We've been going into the health classes and talking about it. And within the high schools, something that, in all honesty, I find really cool that we do is we always bring someone with lived experience into the classes or into the presentation. And it's individual who has had addiction concerns or substance use concerns. But it's a lot of the time the youth end up wanting somebody who's been there, who's done that, you know what I mean? And who's able to just talk about what has happened, and not sugarcoat it, because I'm not a believer of sugarcoating anything. There have to be that open conversation surrounding these very, very important topics as well. So, warning signs. Again, please take these with a grain of salt, and please know that an individual may experience one, may not experience another, as well as they can very much happen at different points and be there and then not be there. It's all over the map when it comes to it. And as parents, we'll end up knowing our children best and know what to look out for when it comes to it. So one of the things that we've been noticing at JACS, especially over the last 3 years, is the loss of interest in things that an individual used to enjoy. And this is a big warning sign, because we've gone so much into isolation, whether it be mandated or not mandated isolation, that a lot of the time we forgot how to have fun, right? And even if it's the little thing of going bowling, right? My husband and I went bowling a few weeks ago, and he's like, why haven't we done this in such a long time? Do you know what I mean? And it's those little pieces, or of going to an escape room, or even going out to ice cream, or going to the movie theater, right? It's things that as children, as youth, they were or were not doing, but sort of forgot about it, right? So looking at, or paying attention if your children have lost interest in those things that they used to do, even if it's going out for bike riding with their friends, or going to the mall. Do you know what I mean? Doing all those things that youth may have done. Having low energy. So that's why I was saying that there's things, again, take it with a grain of salt, because what is low energy? Is low energy loss of motivation? Or is it a loss of interest? Or is it sleeping all the time? Right? So it can look different for everybody. And it's important to identify that the low energy, especially let's say in the winter months, can also contribute to having like a lack of vitamin D, or a lack of certain other vitamins in our body, right? So looking at both aspects of it, and not necessarily jumping to the, oh, there's low energy, they must be like, it must be a warning sign to look out for. Sleeping too much or too little, or seem sleepy throughout the day. Again, this can look different for everybody. It's funny, again, I'll be open and honest, as a parent of two very young children, sleep doesn't always happen all the time, right? And that's where, even as youth or as children, their bodies are changing, their hormones are changing. So sleeping too much or too little will look different for everybody. Some individuals need their 8 hours of sleep to go. Some people need their 6 hours of sleep to go. going to be different for everyone. And it also depends on how they also fill their cups. And if an individual gets their energy from exercising or gets their dopamine filled from exercising, then that's okay too. Someone gets that from sleeping, all right, right? So we got to look at the two sides of the coin when it comes to that. As I mentioned with the isolation, so spending more and more time alone and avoiding the social activities with friends or family. So this is a big one that has also come up with a lot of the parents that we work with, as well as a lot of the youth, where it's maybe not feeling connected to their family members or just not having an interest of what it may be, or not wanting to go to family dinners, or not wanting to be, even if it's part of Shabbat dinners, or not wanting to go to like a family event. They would just much rather be at home. If it's an individual that used to be able and used to want to do all those things, that's where I would look for the warning sign. If it's somebody that's always been more of an introvert, great. But if it's somebody that's been an extrovert and always the life of the party and always around with friends, and then all of a sudden has shut their doors and not wanting to take part in anything and not wanting to communicate with others or do anything, that's where I would look at the warning sign. And I would, again, we're going to look at this a little bit in a few slides as well, but having that conversation of like, what's going on, right? And I have some things to talk about that too. Diet or exercise excessively or fear of gaining weight. This is a big one that I will very much contribute to, or sorry, I was going to say slicha in Hebrew, attribute to, sometimes the Hebrew just comes out. I was going to attribute to social media, right? A lot of the time it's out there. And the moment, and this is the scary part a lot of the time too, where you search something and then all of a sudden, all of your ads all over social media are about that specific topic, right? So you start looking at healthy eating and you start getting ads for dieting, ads for exercise plans, ads for medications you could take, right? And this impacts the youth a lot. And this impacts our children a lot because they see it in TV, they see it in movies, they see it in video games, which has been a huge contributing factor to that as well. So when we start looking at someone being excessive or unhealthily doing something. So I'm just going to give an example. I had a client who loved to spin. Great, go for it. If you like spinning, have fun. But it got to the point where her knees were giving out, and it quite literally was, she had to start wearing braces and was limping in order to get to the bike. So that's where it's having the conversation with her of, is it excessive? And are you harming your body more than doing good? So that's where it's looking at if the diet or exercising excessively is happening. And again, that may be a warning sign for an individual. Engaging in self-harming behaviors, so such as cutting or burning their skin. This is a big one that comes out, and a lot of the signs to look out for with it will look different for a lot of people. But it may even be the simplest sign of somebody who used to wear t-shirts and tank tops, but is now covering their arms all the time. That may or may not be a sign because they're wearing long sleeves in order to hide if there may or may not be any scars from cutting. And again, this will look different for a lot of people. And it's just something to look out for if you may or may not notice something. And if this is happening, then there is a lot more of a mental illness or mental health concern happening, and there does need to be a professional brought in onto the conversation. Smoking, drinking alcohol, or using drugs, my favorite topic. So this is something, again, we've been seeing happen a lot. And it's even going to bring up weed THC, okay? It becomes a lot more acceptable and a lot more open within, again, social media and within society in general. And it's become, unfortunately, a lot more accessible for individuals to get and to get their hands on. I don't know about how in Hamilton, but in Toronto, with the amount of dispensaries that have been happening and have been popping up, they're everywhere. And it's just like every other store in some plazas and stuff like that. But it's also with the alcohol piece, and I know we were chatting about this in the beginning too, when COVID hit and Uber started Ubering alcohol, it was, again, a very detrimental thing that happened to individuals who are struggling with these concerns. So with the smoking, the drinking, or the using drugs, I have a slide on this a little bit later, but when if it becomes excessive and starts to happen as a unhealthy coping technique, right? Because after a certain age, they're legally allowed to use something, right? Or they're legally allowed to engage, that your children or youth are allowed to engage in the actions of drinking or smoking, right? I believe Montreal is 18 years old to be able to have alcohol, whereas Toronto is 19. Yeah, I believe Quebec is a year younger, if I'm not mistaken. So again, having that open, honest conversation, I actually have a fantastic YouTube I can share that has to do specifically with substance use. For children or youth, I can definitely send that over as well and play it later if we wanted to. Engaging in risky or destructive behaviors alone or with friends. This can be from extreme as stealing to, I don't know, stealing to trying to break into cars. Do you know what I mean? Again, very two ends of the spectrum when it comes to it. But again, it's just looking at the risky behaviors, right? It's just like, okay, what can I do to sort of get my adrenaline bubbling and get my just my emotions running. And another thing to look out for even with that is, like, with the risky behaviors, is fighting, something that we've been seeing a lot happen as well, just engaging in whether it be a street fight or just being aggressive when it comes to certain things. So again, just looking out for that. Having thoughts of suicide, as I mentioned before, there's very much a spectrum to look out for when we're looking at the thoughts, behaviors, and ideations of suicide. And how to have that conversation as well. And having periods of highly elevated energy and activity and require much less sleep than usual. So again, just something to look forward to if someone's not sleeping and is starting to run on like an hour or two of sleep. You know, when you get to that point of overexhaustion, where it's just, you end up running on fumes and the adrenaline piece, just looking out for that and seeing if that's a pattern that's starting to happen as well. All right, so how to start the conversation, what we're here for today. So first and most important thing to remember is that children or kids have more knowledge than we may give them credit for, okay? And I will attribute that to the social media and to the accessibility of the internet. And I think it's a good thing because a lot of the, like, I guess you could say more back in the day, a lot of this information wasn't available, right? So we weren't able to have the conversations and there wasn't the knowledge out there, but now there is. So again, when we have these conversations, or when the parents are going to be having the conversations with their kids, it's not necessarily sitting there and saying, okay, so let me introduce you to what mental health is. It's more of, okay, mental health is a topic, let's talk about it. How can we be open and honest with it? And there is a very good chance that it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, as it is a new subject for all to have together. Okay. I also very much, I can't remember if I have this in another slide or not. It's very important to not sugarcoat it and to not discuss it as something else. Mental health and mental wellness is just as important as someone having a cold. And it's just as important as a sickness. And I'm using the word sickness very lightly. We're not going to go to somebody and say, oh, you may be experiencing some of coughing, some of this, some of this. It's no, you have a cold. How can we address it? How can we work through it? How can we take medications if you need to take medications to help get through it? So it's the same thing with mental health and with mental wellness. We got to get straight to the point. Let's not go around and let's just make sure it happens. We also don't have the time to necessarily have an hour-long conversation when it's something that can happen in a few minutes or can happen in a half an hour. And most importantly, make sure that emotions are not running high. If a argument or a fight may or may not have happened at home, it's not the greatest time to start this conversation about mental health. because whether it be as parents, our emotions are running high, or as the youth or children, their emotions are running high. And if someone is not regulated within their emotions, it can just explode into something much, much larger than it needs to be. And it'll probably become unhealthy. And that might end up putting more of a barrier and closing any opportunity that there may have been to be able to have that open and honest conversation at some point. So, how to discuss emotions. This is a big one for me. Because when we're looking at emotions and feelings, a lot of the time as humans, we don't know how to be able to identify them. So first things first is creating a safe space for the children to be, or your kids to be able to open up about it. Even if it's quite literally saying, I'm here. If you ever want to talk about it, let's talk about it. If you don't, okay. When and if you're ready to be able to do that. Being open and honest. So as I mentioned, not sugarcoating it. It's important for also as parents to let them know that you're feeling these things too, and that you may have gone through some concerns and having a hard time identifying the feelings and emotions. Giving them the time. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it doesn't have to be pressured and it doesn't all have to happen in one conversation or in one moment. It could also be that if you're going to have a tough conversation, create some sort of safe word, right? And I very much believe this sort of with any conversation or any piece of communication that may need to happen with somebody, where whether it be a partner or a family member or even a coworker, if someone says, even if it's the word bananas, I'm going to say bananas, and I don't, that's where I'm ending this conversation, and I don't want to keep having this conversation. It has to be respected by both sides because somebody may or may not be ready to have that. So that's where even explaining that to your kids in the beginning and saying, okay, let's come up with a safe word where if you either way, whether it be a safe word or somebody needs to walk away, that's okay too. Because if somebody is not feeling emotionally regulated at that moment to have that conversation, again, it can put a detriment and harm any sort of conversation that may or may not happen. Reassuring them that you're always there for them, right? Because again, the good, the bad, the ugly, it's being there for them. And a lot of the time, individuals, and this is something we hear all the time, that they're scared of the judgment piece. They're scared of the stigma piece of, if I'm going to be honest, if I'm going to express these things, will somebody look at me weirdly? Will somebody, do you know what I mean? Will somebody still want to, will you still love me? Right? That's something that unfortunately you hear with a lot of the youth too. And it's something that with the parents that we work with as well, it's like, oh, you don't love me anymore. I'm not that cute little kid anymore, or you just don't understand at this point. And with this as well, with the emotions, it's also important to spend time together having fun when it comes to it. I'm actually going to stop the presentation 1 second because I should have opened this in another one, but I want to open up something called a feelings wheel or an emotions wheel. So this is something you can purchase if you want to, you don't have to. But are you guys able to see this, the wheel? No? Okay. Oh, because I was sharing specifically that screen, sorry. Okay. Let me move it this way. Okay, there we go. Now are we able to see the wheel that I'm searching? Yeah, okay. I personally have this on my fridge and my daughter is still young. When somebody's asking how you may or may not be feeling, look at how many emotions or feelings can be discussed, right? A lot of the time when we're looking and talking about feelings or emotions, we typically end up going for the inner circle. I'm angry, I'm disgusted, I'm afraid, I'm surprised, I'm sad, I'm ashamed, I'm peaceful, loving, trusting, intrigued, joyful, or proud. We typically end up going for those because that's the first thing in our vocabulary that comes up. But it's I think it's really cool of even just saying, okay, you're angry. Let's even explore that a little bit more. Are you frustrated? Are you annoyed? Are you envious? Are you mad? Are you aggravated, upset? Right? Look how much more can come out of a simple conversation, or the simple word of just anger or being angry. So again, depending on the age of your kids too, and the comfort level that you have with them, this could be involved, like this could be introduced into the conversation as well, and can be something that's like literally put on the fridge. And a lot of the time, at like even just with my colleagues at work, and somebody says, "How are you?" and they say good, and it's like, unacceptable. We're not going to accept the word good. Let's look at that a little bit more. Like, tell me a little, like, what is good? You know what I mean? And that's where we have to sort of start explaining where other emotions may be present as well. So yeah, I would definitely see if that's something that can be discussed as well. Let me open this back up. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's how to discuss emotions. I'm just going to move this back up to the top. Perfect. Okay, knowing your role. So as a parent, this is one of the biggest things. So first and foremost, it's modeling. Taking control of your own mental health and mental wellness, and being able to be open and honest with your kids about it is so, so important. Um, because if we're not doing it for ourselves, how can we advocate for our kids to do it as well? And be open and honest about that conversation. And again, this is something we were chatting with about earlier. We don't have the time to do some of these things, but it could even just be open and honest with your kids and saying, listen, I'm struggling with it too, right? Like, I'm going through the motions. There's like, I'm going to raise my hand and say, there's days when I just cry. And having a good cry is something that I very, very much recommend for anybody to do. Whether it be having a bath or in the car or whatever, having a good cry and letting out those emotions. But again, showing your kids that that's okay, that it's normal to feel the feelings and to feel and these emotions, but it's also normal to not know how to express them, because a lot of the time we don't know how to express them, and we're all still learning how to do that. So being able to model that is so important. Allowing them to explore their emotions and their feelings, giving them the autonomy to be able to do that. A lot of the time within ourselves, nobody likes not being in control. And I'm saying that for everybody. We all like having control over as much as we can. And when we start to lose control over our feelings or emotions, or when somebody starts telling us how we have to feel, that's a trigger for a lot of people. Right. So that's where it's even communicating to your kids and saying, I don't need you to be happy right now. If you're not happy, okay, let's talk about why, or let's talk about how we can maybe not be happy together. You know what I mean? And start looking at that aspect as well. Education and knowledge, and it's providing it to your kids as well. Okay. And having, like, even if it's saying to them, okay, you want to go to a class or anything, let's do it. If we want to look up things together, if we want to watch movies together about it, okay, but let's talk about it. Let's all be on the same page. Listening versus hearing. This is a big one. Okay. And a lot of the time they're very much enmeshed into it. You could say you're listening to somebody, but are you really hearing what they're saying? Right. A lot of the time, I'm going to even just say within a lecture, this was a stat that mind boggled me in university. In an hour lecture, we're only actually comprehending 12 minutes of what's happening in that lecture. So that happens in conversations too. We say we're listening, we want to listen, but we're not actually hearing what's happening. And a lot of the time, we also have to make sure to notice the nonverbal cues that somebody may be presenting with as well. So they could say, yeah, I'm fine. But if someone's sitting there completely covered and their arms are in front and they're not open to the conversation, then there's some concerns there too. One of the biggest like, unfortunately, virtual sort of puts a damper on the therapy aspect of things. But when I see clients, even if I'm on a session and I'm having a conversation with them, there's times when I'm like, oh, your shoulders just went up, or your shoulders are more open. What's going on for you there? Do you know what I mean? Noticing those things of somebody maybe being open literally with their body as well. And that may be a sign that you're able to have that conversation and that they are hearing what you're saying as well. And the validation piece, again, it's huge, knowing that it's okay not to be okay and expressing that to your kids as well. One of the best statements that somebody has ever said to me was, the only people that are truly normal are the ones that are not normal. Okay, because we are all not normal. And if we were all the same and we're all, again, I'm using the word normal very with quotation marks, it'll be a boring world. Right? And that's with the kids as well, right? It's letting them know that it's okay if there's stuff going on. And it's okay if they're experiencing mental health or mental wellness or mental illness concerns. And again, knowing and showing them that you're going to be a sounding board for them without that judgment piece is huge, because there's so much judgment from peers, whether it be from bullies or from people who support them. And unfortunately, sometimes even from teachers, it happens subconsciously for a lot of individuals, right? So just being able to provide them that space if they need it. So just taking note. As I mentioned, the nonverbal communication signs. Yes, it's important to identify them if someone else is presenting them, but also take note in yourself, right? And the nonverbal communication sign could quite literally be a yawn. It could be an eye roll. It could be turning away from a conversation, or it could be even shutting yourself down and crossing hands and crossing knees, right? There's so many nonverbal communication signs out there that we don't notice that we may be doing, but the person sitting across from you does notice those things. And as I mentioned, kids and youth, especially nowadays, are smarter than we realize, and they take note to a lot of these things. So being mindful and being conscious about that as much as we can. Sometimes it happens, but if you can't take note and if you can hopefully pay attention, that would be great if we can. Less is more. It doesn't need to be a lecture. It doesn't need to be, as I mentioned, a whole 1 hour conversation. If it quite literally needs to be, hey, I'm here to support you. If you want to talk about mental health and mental illness, these are some things that I learned. Do you want to talk about it? Cool, let's talk about it. It doesn't need to go on for hours, because again, the interest gets lost, right? And a lot of the time we don't have the time to be able to have that long of a conversation. Working in partnership with your child. This also goes back to very much so a principle within therapy of working with, not for. If you're wanting your son or daughter or your child to work on their mental health or identify it, okay, great, but they need to be wanting to do that too. Because if it's not, again, it can become toxic and it can sort of put more of a damper on the conversation or on the relationship. And it's also important to not do more work than they do. When it comes even, let's say, to therapy or to counseling, I could not tell you the amount of calls or emails I get from parents wanting the therapy from their children. And my answer is always, great, here's my email, get them to reach out to me. If they're wanting the support, we will gladly help them and offer it to them, but they need to want to be there too. Right? And it's like that with everything. With even, let's say, going to the movies. I'm sure we've all had dates or things where you really did not want to be there, right? And we don't end up enjoying it, or we don't end up getting something out of it as well. So that's the same thing with your children, or with your kids. If they're not wanting to have this conversation, they will not get anything out of this conversation, and there might end up being resentment. Thinking or taking a break before you respond. So if you do end up having this conversation with your kids, they might express things to you that may surprise you, or that may sort of give you a shock. So it could even be the littlest things of sitting on your hands, because then that sort of gives you a second of being, because a lot of the time, I know even for me, I talk with my hands a lot, right? So giving that sort of response. Or if it's going into it and saying, okay, I need to count to 3 or to 5 before giving a response, because sometimes when we don't think and we act before we think, doesn't there's times when it's not great. So it's the same thing when it comes to that with our kids, just thinking or taking a break before reacting or responding. Ask permission. And that's asking permission if you can give feedback or if you can have that conversation piece. Because again, that gives the control back to our children or our youth, where a lot of the time the control is taken away from them. Asking them if they want advice, because a lot of the time advice can be positive or negative as a response to an individual. And I know for myself, let's say I'm having a conversation with a girlfriend of mine, I literally have to ask her, okay, am I putting on my therapist hat right now, or am I putting on my girlfriend hat right now? Because I'll say to her, do you want advice or do you want a sounding board? Right. And it's the same thing with our kids too, or with your children, asking them if they're wanting advice or they're just wanting sort of a safe place to vent. And that's where going into that last piece of just providing them the guidance if they want that guidance, that you'll be there to help and support them if they're wanting it. Treatment. So as I mentioned, from a treatment perspective, there's lots out there, not just at JACS, of support groups for the individual, support groups for the family or the support system. Because again, when somebody's experiencing, whether it be mental health, mental wellness, or addiction concerns, it affects the whole family. It affects the whole support system. And just because the individual might not be ready for that support group or the treatment, that doesn't mean that the family's not, or that the support system's not. Getting their school counselor involved with the child's consent, with your children's consent. Don't just go there and say, hey, I need you to talk to my kids, or what's going on. Again, allowing the child to have that, their space and their zone, whether it be of wanting to connect with their school counselor if they want to, right? And then that's where the conversation is, hey, do you want me to talk to them? Do you want me to come into that meeting? Okay. If yes, yes. If no, no. Right. Some things that we get even with counseling, where parents have sometimes emailed or called and be like, what's happening in sessions? Sorry, but none of your business, in a way. Do you know what I mean? Again, if there's no concerns or if there's no fear of harm or anything like that, then it stays as a vault. And that's the same thing with school counselors as well. So there's also the individualized counseling or therapy, and there's lots of options out there. Again, Rabbi, I can send you sort of a list that you can provide to the congregation as well, of opportunities out there. And there's programming, and the programming can literally be like with JACS. I know it was in Toronto, but we had a bowling night the other night. You know what I mean? And it was for youth. It was 15 to 29. Come on out. There's food. It's a safe, sober space. If somebody wants to sort of have fun, let's do it. We're having a skating day in a few weeks, right? So getting involved in some sort of programming is also can be very, very good treatment for individuals. What is codependency? I'm just taking note on time, so I'm just going to go through this a little bit quicker. But does anybody know what codependency is? No, that's okay. I have a little bit of a definition. So I very much prefer to take an actual source when it comes to codependency. So codependency is sometimes referred to as a relationship addiction, because someone can become so dependent on another person to the point of addiction. This addiction can even take form in a parent-child relationship, where a parent can become emotionally and mentally reliant on their children when dealing with a stressful situation. And a codependent parent will rely on their child for their source of happiness, mental wellness, mental stability, and their self-esteem. Okay. And in much simpler terms, when it comes to the codependency piece, something we see with parents a lot of the time too is the feeling and the wanting of being needed and of being wanted. So there's a lot of the time where with parents, it's almost subconsciously, I want you to screw up because I want you to need me. Right. And I want you to be able to call me, and I want to be able to help you and be sort of that hero for you. But then we end up getting to the point of burnt out and saying, oh my God, I'm touched out. I'm burnt out. I don't want to help anybody at this point. But if we don't work on that codependency piece and it starts to become a toxic trait, that's where the concern is. And that's where a lot of the time we have to sort of take note of that when it comes to ourselves as parents. And then looking with the source of happiness when it comes to it. A lot of the time with parents, it's, I'm not happy unless you're happy. That's something we hear a lot of the time when it comes to parents. But again, if we're teaching our kids to be reliant on and not be, sorry, to not be reliant on others for anything, why aren't we doing that for ourselves? Right? We don't necessarily need somebody else to be happy. And that includes our kids as well. Yes, we can be proud, we can be happy, but your source and your sense of happiness and feeling relaxed shouldn't rely on somebody else. And that's where the codependency and the sticky part comes into play. So just a little bit about substance use and mental health. So self-medication, and this is where even just talking about it with kids too, it does not work. Okay. If you're needing to take medications for something, from a mental health or mental illness perspective, make sure that there's a doctor involved in it. If it's from the medical side of things, substance use can worsen or even trigger a pre-existing mental health concern. The use of drugs or alcohol may leave the underlying mental health the mental illness undiagnosed or untreated. The use of substances can mask the symptoms while providing temporary relief. And concurrent disorders. So concurrent disorders is where there's very much a mental illness or a mental health concern along with addiction diagnosis happening at the same time. But it's important to identify something we've been seeing a lot with weed and THC is actually psychosis happening a lot right now with individuals. Because again, affecting the brain chemistry and the brain quite literally still developing at 15, 16 years old, right? So that's something we've been seeing happening a lot and being present for individuals. So yeah, I know I spoke about this a little bit before, but what does JACS do? We offer 11 weekly support groups. We offer the individual counseling as well as the outreach aspect of things. I know that was a lot of information all at once, but does anybody have any questions for me? And if someone prefers to email me, that's okay too, right? If you want to, I'm just going to stop the sharing so that we'll go back into full screen. But if someone prefers to shoot me an email and having any sort of questions and concerns, we are here to help and support you when it comes to that.
Orit, could you share your email again in the chat?
Yes,
just because if people just came in, then they wouldn't have access to that. So it'd be so helpful. Thank you so much.
No problem.
You know, we think we're grown-ups and we know everything. And it's just so helpful to hear this laid out. And you know, the thing about listening and hearing, I found that, you know, like I'm clergy, I know about listening, but you know, there's always more to it, and it's so tenuous. You know, just the function of hearing, yeah, I'm listening, but are you making space for that other person's reality and able to connect with that? The feelings wheel, wow, that's a real gift. I feel like I want to like print out copies to make them available to people. That's a wonderful. If I'd only done that when I was young, like that, just so helpful.
What we do too, or what I've done with sessions also, is that I laminate it and then I give them a marker and I say, okay, circle what's happening for you, or throughout the session, I say, circle what emotions are happening at this time. That way we can look at how many emotions or feelings have come up for them. And that's something that can happen in a conversation as well, right? Our feelings and emotions just pop up. We don't tell them when to pop up.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Anybody wants to unmute and just ask a question or give a comment?
Okay, so I had a comment when you mentioned before about how your children may not want to go to therapy or whatnot. I found that very difficult because my daughter at first was hesitant to go to therapy before. And it took a few tries and people to go to until she found one that she connected with. And I felt that it really did help her a lot. It's hard because I feel like at that age, they think that I don't need help. I don't need to go. Like, I don't want to do it. You know what I mean? So how do you get them on board is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, no, first things first, I want to commend you for being able to support your daughter and offering that support to her when and if she was ready for it. What I was mentioning too is also there's so much stigma surrounding therapy and
Mhm.
surrounding all of that, right? So that's where yes, you can say, okay, I'm going to come with you if you want. I can be there if you want, give it 5 minutes again. But in order for your daughter, there had to be some sort of want for her to want it and for her to actually want to give in. And that's what I'm hearing from you too. And I think it's also important what you mentioned that it took a few different therapists to find the right fit,
For sure, yeah.
right? So I think as you were mentioning, you provided her the support and you were sort of that sounding board and you said, hey, listen, therapy is an option. Are you interested? And it sounded like she was interested at a certain point.
Yeah, it took a little convincing, I guess, because at the beginning she would just be like, I'm here. I don't know
Yeah.
why, you know. Um, but yeah, over time, she
Mhm.
definitely opened up and stuff. It was just unfortunate. The one therapist she had left
Mm.
that location. So I think I'm trying to look for another one for her.
So that's where even if it's even if like individual therapy might not be available at that time,
Mhm.
right? Saying, okay, let's even just, okay, you don't want to do one-on-one. Okay, fine. You want to join a group? Maybe if you have other people your age that are sort of going through the motions as well, you can open and relate to them, right? So having that different option for them as well. And if you're looking for someone new for her and it's virtual, we might have somebody on the team if it's mental health.
Yeah.
Um, so I think you mentioned like because within if it's the 15, then we can definitely you can shoot me an email and we can definitely connect and that might be an option that's available as well.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Orit, I want to thank you so, so much for giving of your time and your expertise to us here. It's such an important topic for all ages, our
Mhm.
mental health, our mental well-being, especially what we've gone through in the past 3 years. It's been a bit of a trauma, and it's been so isolating. And I think
Mhm.
we learned things about ourselves and what's most important to ourselves through that process, in some ways for better and in some ways for more difficult and challenges. So it's really wonderful to be able to talk to someone about it and hear your encouragement.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here as well.
Thank you so much, Orit, and a good evening to all of you. And let's keep talking and let's keep listening to each other and be there.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.